The Wedding Road Train, written and told by Kiefer Adams. When summer returned to the island of Sodor, Bertie the bus was worried that he would have to handle all the holidaymakers on his own. But one day he discovered that he didn't need to worry at all. He was driving down the road that passed Thomas's branch line when a familiar whistle sounded up ahead. But it wasn't that of an engine. It was none other than Beatrice, the road train. "Hello, Beatrice," hooted Bertie. "I thought it would be a matter of time until we saw you again." "It's great to be back," Beatrice beamed. "This summer's going to be my last, though, unfortunately. I'm to work on another part of the mainland after this." "Make your last stay on the island a memorable one," chuckled Bertie, and he drove off down the road. Beatrice had to collect passengers from Farquhar, so she drove down the road with her 3 coaches in tow. When Beatrice reached Farquhar, she was just about to cross the road when James appeared. He had been shunting throughout the day and was looking forward to a rest, but the sight of Beatrice had perked him up. "Beatrice!" he cried. "Good to see you again. I'm sorry I missed you last summer." "Oh, that's all right," replied Beatrice. "What's new?" "Well," said James, "we're getting a wedding this afternoon." "A wedding?" pondered Beatrice. "It's a lovely time," said James. "We had one last week for Mrs. Kindley's daughter. Lovely sight, according to Percy." "I've never been to a wedding," said Beatrice thoughtfully. "Who's getting married?" "Edward's driver," replied James. "It's said to be a wonderful service today. I've got to go. I'm taking guests to the wedding." And James darted out of the yard tender first. Beatrice sighed. Going to a wedding had always been a dream to her. But would she get her chance during her last visit to Sodor? Later that day, Thomas was at the middle station of his branch line. The weather had gotten hotter and he was feeling flustered. At that moment, Bertie arrived. He looked rather nervous. "Are you okay?" Thomas asked. "You look as if you've had a nasty run-in." "I almost did with that car," replied Bertie. "The one for the bride?" Thomas asked. "Indeed," replied Bertie. "Giles is so reckless, even when he thinks he's carrying very important people. Be careful if you see him, won't you?" "Of course," replied Thomas. The guard then blew his whistle and Thomas set off. "I hope everything goes well with this wedding," he said to himself, and he puffed cautiously up the line. Giles was a very proud and pompous car. He was only taken out for private events, such as parties and on this occasion weddings. The moment he had learned he was going to take the bride to the church at Norrby, he was delighted and hadn't stopped boasting about it for days. By this point, Giles had picked up the bride and was making his way to the church. But every road vehicle and engine he passed, he had to show off his smart white paint and banner. He had just turned a corner when suddenly there was a loud hissing noise and Giles slowly came to a halt.
"I'm overheated,"
he groaned. "I can see that," snapped his driver. "That'll teach you for staying out in the sun for too long." The bride was anxious. She had to be wed to Edward's driver in half an hour. The driver scratched his head. He wasn't sure what to do, except suffer the moaning of Giles, who desperately wanted to be rescued more than anything. The news soon spread down the line. "That's just typical," grumbled Thomas. "I knew that car was going to ruin everything." "It's not technically Giles's fault," said Thomas's driver. "Anything can happen, especially in weather like this. We've now got to figure out how the bride's going to get to the church." James had been listening to the conversation. Then he perked up. "I know what to do," he cried. "You?" said Thomas. "What can you do?" Not what I can do, said James, but someone we know can help. James explained everything. Well done, James, congratulated Thomas's driver. I'll tell the Fat Controller at once. He hurried away to find a telephone to make the arrangements. Time ticked by. Edward and his driver, dressed in his smartest suit, stood waiting outside Norrenby Church. Don't worry, Charlie, whispered Edward. I'm sure she'll be here soon. Edward's driver sighed. He was just about to go inside the church to wait when a whistle sounded. But of course, it was not the whistle of an engine, it was Beatrice. She came gliding in next to Edward, now painted in a rich creamy white coat of paint, with wings painted on her bonnet in gold. One of her coaches had also been repainted too. She stopped next to Edward and the bride appeared. Veil down and her bouquet of flowers at the ready. She looked beautiful. The wedding was an instant success. This has got to be the best visit to Sodor ever, Beatrice told Edward. Indeed, the old engine agreed. Thank you, Beatrice. And no one had been more useful than Beatrice, the road train and friend to the Fat Controller's railway.